you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Amy Davis, Content Marketing Manager for Reed Talent Solutions. And for the next hour, we're going to be exploring the latest inclusive talent acquisition trends and techniques needed to ensure your company stands out in a candidate-driven market. To do this, may I welcome our speakers, panelists for today. Salma Khan, Senior Manager, Global Company Mobilities Team at PwC. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us, Salma.
Everyone. Thanks, Amy.
Jackie Handy, who is a inclusive leadership consultant. Nearly got that wrong. Good afternoon, Jackie.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Martin Mason, founder and CEO of Unleash. Welcome, Martin. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Amy. Lovely to be here.
And finally, last but not least, our very own Annie Parry, who is Continuous Improvement and Project Lead for RPO at Reed Talent Solutions. Thanks for taking part, Annie, this afternoon.
Hello, nice to not see you all.
Before we get started, I'm just going to do a bit of housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded. We will email a copy to you following the event. Please, as we go along, there's a chat function, should be on the top right hand, hopefully. I've got my left and right hand corner. If you put any questions in that you'd like to ask our panelists as you go along, and let us know who you would like to address them to, that would be really useful. And we can get started. So a recent survey that of 1,000 business leaders and hiring managers we commissioned as Reed Talent Solutions, it was actually revealed that almost half of businesses with over 1,000 employees are finding it hard to recruit professionals in the current climate. 50% of those surveyed said finding the right people was their biggest challenge when looking to attract new talent to their organisation. And over a third of those involved in talent attraction believe their employee value proposition wasn't clear. So we all know that COVID-19 has really shaped and accelerated the emerging trends we're seeing in businesses globally. The pandemic combined with Brexit has made recruitment an even bigger challenge for UK organisations as they battle for the best professionals in shrinking talent pools. It poses the obvious question, why wouldn't you widen the talent pool by adopting a more inclusive talent acquisition strategy? So our first question is, how important is having an employee value proposition as part of your talent acquisition strategy, and what does it need to include? So Annie, do you want to take to the floor first and take that question?
Yep, absolutely. So employer branding and AVP is more important than ever. I mean, as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, the competition for talent at the moment is the fiercest that I've seen it in the last 23 years. It's really, really busy out there. So I think that making sure that you're perceived as an attractive employer is going to be absolutely critical. In terms of what it needs to include, it's got to be unique. You can't just cut and paste and say, well, that's what everyone else is doing, so I'll do the same. And it has to be authentic. I think it's nice to go to market and say, this is what we're all about and have an attractive job advert. But if the reality is very, very different, then you're soon going to find that they find that out during the interview process, or they join and they're disappointed. So it's not going to help that attraction and retention. So yeah, EVP, it's what it's all about at the moment.
Thanks, Annie. Salma, what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, so I think in order to succeed in a time of such unprecedented change and disruption, organizations need to ensure that they're creating a positive working environment and a culture that maximizes employee engagement, performance, productivity. And more often than not, this requires leaders and employees to change the way they think, act, and behave. So you've got to really be leading the way and showing the world that that's what you're doing. However, we know that culture change doesn't happen overnight. So teams have ways of working, habits, relationships. That's all really hard to change. So it's really vital that you focus on the critical behaviors and make the experience feel different. So we've seen over the last year that the pandemic's forced and escalated remote virtual working, for example. Companies have needed to adapt not only their physical infrastructure, but understand the needs of their employees more than they've needed to in the past, to retain their talent pool and attract the right talent. We've also seen new immigration rules in place following Brexit and the EU, so it's important the impact of that's fully considered. There's been significant cost pressure on a lot of businesses as a result. The employers are starting to see more requests for remote working from candidates and employees, for example, near their families, a better workplace management for their own health, consideration for reward and benefit packages. So your employee value proposition should offer choice, recognition, and reward in areas that are increasingly important to the emerging workforce. And the new workforce will have different expectations around the experience at work and the environment at work. So I think flexibility has become an increasingly important component of your EVP, especially given the pressures young talent demands around flexible working, work-life balance, and mobility. So the way people work, where they work, and the nature of your workplaces must all underpin your EVP. Flexible career paths help to ensure you get the most out of your employees, whilst ensuring that employee engagement is still key. So quite critical to the new EVP, I think.
Lots to think about there. Goodness. Martin, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, building on Annie's point, actually, I think it's quite interesting. We at Unleash, we're quite fortunate that we get to work with a lot of different organisations and kind of get that fishbowl kind of view of, from the outside in to see, more objectively how organisations show up to their people. And I think what's been quite fascinating is there seems to have been like a flurry of organisations kind of scrabbling to pull together an EVP over the last year. And what we've often seen is people almost doing that cookie cutter approach that Annie talked about of, taking something that is an existing model somewhere else and trying to replicate that in their own organisation. And the shame with that is it lacks the personality and the uniqueness of that organisation. It's a bit like emails. We see it all the time with people that start, how many emails have we had in the last few weeks where it's like, dear Annie, hope you're having a lovely week. And then it's the same kind of stuff that's repeated out. There's no kind of real core personality in there. And I think that's a good thing for organisations to stop and think about before they do their EVP work is who are we and what do we stand for? The other thing that's been quite an interesting trend is that we've often seen organisations try to do their inclusion and talent strategies in isolation, then get somebody in to do EVP where they've kind of packaged it all with a beautiful bow and presented it back to the organisation as is. And the shame in that is when organisations are now starting to do a lot more work around talent and inclusion, which historically for a lot of organisations have either been quite traditional or underinvested, it means that they end up putting an EVP out today that works for the organisation right now, but isn't meeting what they're trying to achieve strategically for the future, or thinking about the type of organisation they're going to be. And so you end up with these two big projects going off in isolation, tons of work, and then almost having to rehash it at the end once they've figured out where they've got gaps around talent or inclusion, for example, and not linking it in with the organisation strategy properly. So where we've seen organisations do this really well is where they've almost done a bit of diagnostic or audit work up front before doing their EVP to really understand what the organisation culture and inclusion is like today, aspirationally where they're trying to get to in the next 3, 5, 10 years, and then mapping the EVP against that. So it's bringing the right type of talent into the organisation and retaining them rather than producing more of what they've got today.
Oh, yeah, interesting. And Jackie, anything you want to add to what Martin just said or the others?
Well, we've had some real comprehensive responses, haven't we? And there's not a whole lot for me to add, but I would just like to reinforce, I think, some of the points that have been made. So clearly, from an EVP perspective, yes, it's got to be authentic. And I think organisations should be really considering not just what makes us unique, but how are we demonstrating that to the world? I mean, truly demonstrating that to the world. And of course, we're going to be talking a lot about diversity and inclusion in talent acquisition during this webinar. But ultimately, you just can't do this overnight. I think this has been mentioned already, but it has to take time and it has to take consistency, because what the market wants is a reality that meets the promise. So there is no point in having an EVP out there that attracts people, so everybody's on the sort of war for talent, as we say, but that attracts people into an organisation that then get into that organisation and think, hang on a minute, there is an incongruence and a disconnect between what I thought I was coming into and what I'm actually a part of. So all points have been very valid, but to Martin's point about that diagnostic piece and really looking at, okay, who are we? I would just encourage anybody watching, just do that truly and honestly, and take a very 360 holistic viewpoint. You know, it's not just you and your board members, for instance, because you're going to have one perspective, but what about varying layers of your workforce? What about your external partners and stakeholders? What about your customers? You know, what do they see you as? And then what resonates best with you? So there's more I could say, but I think a lot of it's been said, so I just reinforce many of the points.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'm going to pick on you again, Jackie, for this this next question. Diversity, well, to start off with anyway, diversity and inclusion are terms we hear a lot when we talk about candidate attraction. What would you consider to be the best practice in this area in terms of talent acquisition strategies?
How long have you got? I suppose that's the
about 3 minutes.
All right, so I'll keep my bits concise, because I mean this is my bread and butter. You know, this is what I work with organisations in terms of you know, their diversity and inclusion strategies. And to my previous point, it is a journey. It shouldn't be considered an intervention, a one-time programme or anything like that. Diversity and inclusion is, well, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice, but either way, it ain't going away. This is this is what our society is and the demographic of our society represents. And in terms of talent and prospective talent, I think people these days are looking for things that are slightly different, that are much more meaningful, purpose-driven and people-orientated. So from a talent acquisition strategy, I would say, I know you're going to ask this later, so I won't preempt it too much, but, you know, I think we think about, well, we just can't find the talent. Well, I would question, where are you looking? Because there is talent out there, and employers, prospective employers, need to think a little differently and widen the proverbial box in terms of where they're seeking talent and the ways in which they're seeking talent. So, you know, check out various platforms that are likely to attract and engage with diverse candidates. Always think about, are there candidates that cannot access even this job advertisement, right? So are we just simply copying and pasting a job description that's as old as the hills because it worked for us 10 years ago? You know, what you did yesterday is not necessarily going to work tomorrow. So really think about how you can build on that and also widen your pool, if you like, for seeking talent with that sort of critical viewpoint of diversity at the helm. I think as well, one of the big things, and of course there's various elements of diversity, but a big one often is the problematic perception, I think, around reasonable adjustments. Now, I'm not here to get into the legalities of this, but what I would love to see is a society of prospective employers really being more proactive in terms of showcasing really what they do and the fact that they want people to be open, and by creating such psychological safety really right at the outset, perhaps by saying we don't always have the answers and we don't always know, but we're open. You know, I give you a rough example, but ultimately when you have so many people, there are, I believe, around 600,000 people in this country living with disabilities right now, and many of which are very able to work, many of which want to work. So it's about, how do we create the environment that enables them to compete fairly and actually be seen and be accommodated? It's, you know, they are reasonable adjustments, not unreasonable adjustments, and the clues are there. So I think that's another element. We've already referred to, I'll keep this brief now, but we've already referred to flexible working. Again, I think the world of work has changed. Flexible or hybrid working options, they're not going away in terms of what talent is seeking, and therefore what organisations need to respond to. Salma mentioned, I think earlier, that, you know, we showed it can work because we were forced into that. But now let's make that a bit more the usual thing that we see, I guess, because once again, that's going to accommodate so many more people from diverse backgrounds that have various reasons why going into the office all the time is not appropriate or accessible, or indeed working from home all the time. My last point, if I may, Amy, and then I'll pass on to somebody else to answer, and that is for people to really get, this is hiring managers, to really get in the zone of what do we need really? And let's stop carbon copying these job descriptions again and saying we need degrees or we need this skill or this experience, but start to really think about what is necessary and what is, dare I say it, a slightly old-fashioned view of what will make a successful candidate in the market. If you want to recruit a different type of candidate and you want to win this war for talent, you've got to think differently about the entire process.
Lovely. Thank you, Jackie. That was really insightful. Martin, as an advocate of D&I as well, what would you say on this topic?
I'd echo a lot of what Jackie has said. I think we try to approach this by thinking of kind of three core things when it comes to an inclusive talent management strategy or an inclusive recruitment strategy. And it's the most simple, pragmatic things that will make the biggest difference in talent management and in inclusive recruitment. So removing barriers from the process. There's so many unintended barriers that people have in current recruitment processes that they're unaware of. And so doing an exercise to map step by step from application through to onboarding. We've done that with a number of organisations now, and it's always a fascinating activity because they'll always say, no, we're really inclusive, we're really diverse, we're really good at pulling candidates in, but we just can't get the right types of candidates for the roles that we're looking for. It's the same types of people. And when you start to unpick the process and look at, one example that springs to mind, one business we were with recently had like 18 steps from application through to onboarding, of which 14 of those were heavily biased, and they were completely unaware, but because they'd adopted very traditional recruitment processes, actually, if I was somebody with Asperger's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, for example, that process was nigh on impossible for me to get through, but they would have been absolutely perfect for the role. Because in this particular instance, one of the roles they were recruiting for was around data analytics, and the people that are going to be strongest with that are people with, absolute focus of thought, conscientiousness, etc., which, a lot of people with neurodiverse conditions will have, but the process eliminates them from achieving, high place in that recruitment process. So starting with the removal of barriers, mitigating bias in the process. The fascinating thing for me has always been, as somebody who's worked in this space for quite a long time in organisations, the amount of people that do exactly what Jackie said, where they copy and paste a job description or a recruitment process. And when you park that and say, OK, talk to me about what would the dream candidate look like for this role? What will they be able to do for you? And what are the outputs you're seeking? And you start there and almost, write it back on the back of a napkin. You end up usually with about 5 or 6 things that they really need this person to be good at. And then if you map that back to the recruitment process, seldom do the two marry up, where, we had one recently with a general manager of an organisation in retail where they said, they need to be great at marketing, they need to be great with people, really good emotional intelligence, commercially savvy, brilliant. And then you look at the job description and it's like, things like must hit the ground running, and all those types of things within, but have nothing to do with the outputs of the job. So starting there is quite important, and going beyond kind of reasonable adjustments and, traditional practices and thinking about outputs would be key, I would say.
Fabulous. Thanks, Martin. I just worried for a minute I was on mute then, but I wasn't, so that was good. Salma, anything you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So I would echo all of Jackie's comments as well as Martin's. I think, the world's becoming smaller and more interconnected. In 2020, we saw a significant, change in workforce practices. ESG became so important, hybrid working arrangements, stronger focus on well-being and mental health, the surge in energy behind the Black Lives Matter movement, for example. All of these things have raised the focus on D&I. And I think, without an institution really thinking about D&I within, whether it's the job description or, their day-to-day, it's just not something that's going to be attractive for talent to come to. And a number of institutions are now reassessing their D&I strategies using data analytics combined with like a clear set of diversity policies. And again, as Martin mentioned, they need to be specific to your organization. and not just a generic copy-paste job. So it's therefore ever more important that you're considering diversity and inclusion within your talent acquisition strategy. One of the things I've experienced at PwC is, for example, having a color brave team present at recruitment events, talking through the diverse talent pool we have and how we're encouraged to celebrate our differences, right through to having an open mind and diverse opinions within our performance management process, and sharing that with potential candidates so they can see your brand, see where you're going with it. And then looking at global workforce, Jackie mentioned this earlier, but attracting talent from an international pool enhances diversity within your organization and provides access to broader talent. You may have recently seen job adverts on LinkedIn, for example, which show the roles open to working from anywhere in the world. It's seen as a competitive advantage, and institutions can use it as a way to distinguish themselves as leaders in D&I.
Lovely, thanks, Salma. Annie, any more thoughts? Is there anything left to say?
I think there's very little left to say, but I couldn't agree more. I think there's just one statistic out there which I think absolutely underpins everything that's been said, which is that a lot of the job adverts are as difficult to read as Darwin's Origin of the Species, and I think that's absolutely true. It's an incredibly complicated, long list of requirements, which, as you said, Martin, there's only a very small part of them that are absolutely relevant. And my big question is always, if you're using the same advert that you've used for years and years and years, and the same job description that probably isn't even accurate anymore because everyone's just put one line on it every year for the last 20, and then you're using the same selection process, then how can you possibly expect that to result in a diverse talent pool? One size fits all generally means it doesn't fit anyone.
Yeah, makes sense. So on to the next question. Candidate experience is vital when it comes to acquisition. What can be done in this space to stand out from the crowd and ensure that candidate experience is as inclusive as possible? Salma, that one is for you first.
Okay, so I think we may have touched on this already, but global experience is essential for the development of talent through the most senior roles, but also to ensure you're sharing experience and best practice whilst incorporating diversity to better attract talent. So having a good mobility or flexible working policy is an enabler to having colleagues with the right skills in the right place at the right time. The pandemic's obviously increased the importance employees place on living close to family and friends. We've seen many examples of new joiners accepting, for example, a lower salary for fully remote working options. So remote working options open doors for skilled individuals unable or unwilling to relocate where the work currently is. Your organization may not necessarily be able to, accommodate it, but if you can, then, I would highly recommend that you look at that. Allowing people to stay in their local communities also contributes to successful local economies. And as we all know, we have some ethical responsibility within our local economy to play here. I also think it's really important that companies are able to take candidates on a sustainable journey. So they should be rewarding, recognizing and incentivizing behaviors that reduce, for example, negative impact on the environment, and communicate externally on reducing carbon footprint or around employee well-being. We ran a recent CEO survey, and there was a very high emphasis on prioritizing the well-being of people and the importance of maintaining a tightly knit workforce bonded by their culture and a shared sense of responsibility. And I think obviously talent looking out into the organization will really see that as key. So in fact, around 70% of CEOs are increasing investment in talent development and workforce engagement as a result of this. And then one last thing to mention is just communicating. So both internally and externally, communicate what your drive is, what sort of cultural change you're taking within your organization, and that will attract the kind of talent that you want.
Fabulous. Thank you, Salma. Martin, anything you'd like to add to what Salma said?
Yeah, again, I'd echo a lot of what Salma said there. I think what is interesting is the amount of organisations that we work with that say they want to have a diverse and inclusive workforce, but then through default end up bringing in more of the same types of people into the organisation. So I think one of the key differentials is to be really clear about how they're going to bring in culture add versus culture fit into the organisation, and how they really make that explicit through the process to say, and a bit like Jackie said earlier, you know, be honest about the fact if we don't have all the answers, we know we're not the finished article yet, but we're really trying, and put a statement or commitment out there as part of the recruitment process to say we are actively seeking people that are different, you know, for diversity of thought or for diversity of experience, because we want to make our organisation better. We've seen through some of the clients that we've worked with where by doing that kind of statement piece and advertising that up front, they are getting a better diversity pool of applicants in, because people are seeing that they can add value because they're different to the other people they've met in that organisation. So use that as the selling point. Also kind of building on Salma's point around identity, in that so often people are saying, yeah, we want diverse candidates in the organisation, and use that as a bit of a label for certain demographics. So we often hear it as a paraphrasing for ethnicity, for example, and actually just saying, you know, not being frightened to use labels to say we actively encourage, you know, applications from the LGBT plus community or from Black people because we're underrepresented in that area. Being quite open about that means that candidates can make informed choices and know what they're signing up to in terms of the organisation, and are clear of what their experience is going to be. So to Annie and Jackie's point, they don't join thinking it's one organisation and then find out that it's actually a very different organisation. And the last kind of tip around this is there's still a lot of typical application forms out there where people can't identify as themselves in those processes, so already you're, you know, alienating a group of potential people. So gender's a really good example of that. The amount of binary application forms that I see day in, day out on most websites where, you know, if I'm either gender fluid or non-binary, or if I'm transitioning, it's very difficult for me to tick a box that shows who I am in that process, and therefore that says to me as a candidate, well, the organisation doesn't really understand me, so do I want to work here? So simple things like that make a big difference.
Fabulous, thanks, Martin. Anything, Annie, even Annie, are you there? What are your thoughts on it?
So I don't think I could possibly put it as well as Martin has. Like I say, the candidate experience. I mean, I think there's been so many candidates have a poor experience during the acquisition process, and then companies wonder why they're not joining. And it's a case of, well, did you think about every single step of the way, how you were looking after these people, and how you were making sure that, I mean, I know in Retalent Solutions we talk about equity rather than equality, and in terms of making sure that it, you know, has everybody got that opportunity to really show the very best of themselves during that interview process. And that's it for me. Is it a supportive interview, you know, selection process? Is it going to make sure that, you know, that candidate can really turn up and show what they're made of, or is it just designed to filter people out at every opportunity?
Lovely, thank you. Jackie, have you got any thoughts?
Always. And yeah, I mean, again, without sort of sounding like a stuck record, some great comments already been mentioned that I would advocate for. In particular, I'm so glad it's been mentioned already, and that is Martin's point around culture add rather than culture fit. I think is a really important thing to consider. And how can you ensure that the candidate experience is truly inclusive? Train your people who are going to be interviewing and hiring to do so properly. And I'm really not being patronising here or condescending to anybody, but we see so many people. In fact, I saw a post very recently on social media that was talking about whether you can ask personal questions of candidates, and there were so many people saying, well, you've got to, because you know you want to get to know what they do at the weekend and what about their family. And it's like, oh, let's not get into these realms. So there's a lot of people that through no fault of their own just don't realize what you can and can't say from a legal perspective. But even beyond that, because I don't want to get into those wranglings, but beyond that, from an experiential perspective, you know, to Martin's point about, you know, gender fluidity potentially and the binary nature of application forms, the same thing potentially applies for somebody that might be interviewing who does identify as in a binary sense from a gender perspective, if they then hear something different, that's just going to trigger, simple as that. So, you know, there's those simple things which of course take time and investment, but train your people to do it properly and to do it well, and work with an expert that can help you with that. The other thing would be, I think, that can also help with the candidate experience is not just tell the world you are a diverse and inclusive organisation, but actually represent that through the interview process. A lot of organisations now are being very mindful of having diverse interview panels. I would urge people to be on the side of caution, perhaps, about singling out the same, dare I say, diverse members of staff to kind of show up and just be the black face or the gay face or whatever that might be in the crowd. But nevertheless, I think if you can get into the habit of actually showcasing through that acquisition process that your business does represent what it says on the tin, if that makes sense, and it comes across in the processes. So yes, it's more around the structure of that interview, so that they are structured in a way that enable the candidate to come forward in the best way that that candidate can, but also we're not just having casual chats that could tip over into some unsafe space for certain candidates, and also that we're asking relevant, valuable questions at interview. So this is simple stuff. And there'll just be one final comment that I'll make, because I know Martin mentioned about, you know, the diversity, and we're looking to, you know, perhaps increase diversity, and that's okay to have on adverts. And I would totally agree with that. What I would say, however, is another social media post I saw when working with some clients the other week was around, it was a lady that had posted this and said that she had been contacted by a recruiter or hiring manager and actively encouraged to apply because she was a woman. Now, this is not an attractive acquisition strategy. I'll just put that out there, because people don't want to feel like they are being tokenized. So absolutely, Martin's point about let's embrace and let's be very proactive in saying that we embrace and we welcome applications from various different marginalized groups, perhaps. But let's not cherry pick and use that as our kind of opening line, I suppose, when we're approaching candidates perhaps in the marketplace. Nobody wants to feel tokenized.
Thanks, Jackie. So let's kind of move our focus on kind of technology, and what role does technology actually play in a talent acquisition strategy, and what are the pitfalls to avoid when it comes to technology that can undermine diversity inclusion tactics in talent acquisition? Martin, I think you might be the best person to take this one first, because I'm sure you've got a lot to say, but yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Amy. It is an area of passion for us. So one of my single biggest frustrations when I was in-house as a kind of head of talent, head of recruitment in a former life, I'm a reformed person now, but when I used to do that job, I was always baffled by the lack of human in the process, and the fact that there's so many providers and suppliers out there that do some great services, but when it comes to things like inclusion and talent, it's the same stuff out there. Until recently, it's very rare that you see anything kind of new or innovative in that space, certainly from our past experience. And so thinking about the earlier point we made around starting with the end in mind, you know, what is it you're trying to do, or who are you trying to bring into the business or your organisation? What are the skills that you need? And starting there. We went on a massive project a number of years ago to try and unpick this in a more innovative way, and we found that by rethinking the talent process and starting with that end in mind, we were able to connect some technologies that removed bias from the process and gave everybody a fairer and more transparent chance of getting roles internally and externally within the business. So using talent marketplace technologies, very good. You've got to get the right one. There are a number out there that claim to do some brilliant things and can often be quite expensive, but one that will really help you identify skills, so it's more objective, will be essential. The right identification methods in that platform, as we've talked about earlier, so how people can identify during the process, not asking invasive or personal questions, as Jackie said, because it's no one wants to be the token diversity hire. In terms of assessing fit for the role, what data points are in the process rather than just human subjectivity. So the use of the right psychometric or situational judgment test processes for certain roles we would advocate, because at least then you're getting another point of data in the process to make sure that you're making informed decisions. One example I can think of with that, we worked with a client on, was where they were trying to attract a more rounded population for store managers in a retail organisation. We used psychometrics in the right way with them through the process to identify the specific attributes of potential that needed to be met for that role. It increased the diversity of the population that were applying, and also it gave them an 89% retention on the candidates that came in, because they were found to be culture add and their potential matched the role that they were doing. So using that type of data and technology and joining it together is a really powerful way of bringing talent in and retaining them.
Lovely, thank you. Annie, anything you would like to add to that, kind of from a retail and solutions perspective?
I think from our perspective, we use technology a lot in the process because it can make the whole system, the whole process a lot slicker. It also, I think, offers really simple benefits to candidates, like they can access the system at 24/7 when most recruiters don't like to work 24/7. So you can progress yourself to the next stage, complete different applications and testing. I think the important thing is, very much as Martin mentioned, that it doesn't become the 18-stage process he mentioned earlier, where people are just adding in technology for the sake of, well, this looks like fun, we'll have one of these. And it's still retaining that human interaction at the high value stages, where people do really want to talk to somebody and find out a bit more, and be able to really explore a potential employer and talk about what it's actually going to be like working there. So certainly it has its place. It's just that importance of not just going, someone said to me a few years ago, all recruiters are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence soon, and there's a bit of me that thinks, okay, great, will I continue to get paid? But I do think it's very much about getting it in the right place at the right time and using it as an addition rather than a instead of.
Okay, fabulous. Right, we're getting quite close to time for Q&A. So what I'm going to do, unless Jackie and Salma, you've got anything really you want to share on technology, we'll just move on to the next question, if that's all right with you guys.
Just one teeny thing, and it really is a teeny thing, but if you're going to use technology, I think there's pros and cons. Try and choose something that's accessible for all. That's it.
Fabulous. That was very succinct and lovely. So in a candidate short market, to what extent do upskilling, I know some of you touched on it earlier, upskilling, training and securing early talent play a part? How can businesses best use these methods? Can't even talk today. How can businesses best use these methods to their advantage? Salma, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so I think the impact of Brexit has been quite significant, actually, and meant that acquiring talent in some cases has become very complex, costly, and requires a lot of time. There's also fewer non-business critical arrangements proceeding due to cost in many cases, and resulting in strain both on the employee experience and the customer service. So given the continuous change that we are experiencing, there's an added element of uncertainty, and that's impacting the pool of talent that's available. So businesses can tackle some of these challenges by upskilling their internal functions like HR, finance, tax, mobility. They can also create policies and some framework to help them withstand the volatile environment, be more consistent and remain competitive. So yeah, my advice would be, think about what framework you may already have or potentially, lack of, and think about putting that in place, whether that's for D&I or for flexible working or whatever it might be. Businesses can also implement self-service technology. I think Annie touched on this earlier, but we've seen an increasing shift in new talent wanting to have more empowerment within the recruitment process. And a self-service model can help with the costs as well. But it opens up the talent pool to a wider global reach and automates some of that process. They can kind of log in and out when they want, and access it more easily. So the nature of the organization's brand is initially important, but a smooth, timely recruitment and onboarding experience will help your business to stand out in a competitive job market. We've also seen since the pandemic that there's an increased awareness in employees of why and what next. And it's important to share and understand. There should be an understanding between the candidate and the employer in order to secure a successful candidate. This warrants a focus on what we tend to call a career deal. So almost setting it out like, this is a deal between us. And forward-thinking companies who've invested in the deal model are being very successful. There's also something around having a total talent function. So getting, a function that's integrated within the business, aligned with the leadership, and connected with your recruitment team. Having more of an influencer or a consultative approach to recruitment rather than, as we said, a copy-paste looking at whatever the traditional approach was.
Lovely, thanks. Annie, do you want to add anything to that one?
Just a very small thing. I think we speak to organisations who have even started looking at primary school age children in terms of talking about their business, because there's the theory that by the age of 8, particularly in STEM, people's minds are made up. So it is that critical to start getting the information out there early. And I think a lot of companies have got really good grad schemes because that's the traditional route, and I think we need to look an awful lot wider than that. But I will pass time over. I'm sure Jackie and Martin would have a lot more to say.
Yeah, fabulous. Martin, Jackie, do you want to have anything to add on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Always, learning and development's a big part of what I do in my business. So, in terms of development, training, upskilling, this seems to be a universal requirement. People want access to development, but they may not always want to be on long, tedious, arduous training courses anymore. And I know Salma alluded to this. And so this whole kind of blended learning, perhaps, part physical, whether that's still on a virtual platform or in a room, and part online seems to be a good way forward. It's almost like a hybrid training learning piece. A lot of the work that I'm doing now is becoming much more bite-sized. And I think that helps because, again, one of the biggest challenges I think with training and the whole learning and development space is just the amount of information you're always giving to people that just overloads them, and of course it's taking them away from the day job in the process. So I think I would just say keep things bite-sized. You can still make that innovative. Think about the blend, especially, we're not just necessarily talking to organisations here who are smaller, perhaps, or just UK centric. So for global organisations, there's a massive benefit to enhancing that kind of cultural cognizance, I think, as you engage with perhaps team members and co-workers from other locations. So you've got a lovely cultural element into that. So really consider that actually when you're developing and delivering the training content in whatever way you do that, so that it's applicable to various different cultures, almost speaking the same language, if you like, unified through your EVP, where we started from. And I just keep saying it, but always make sure it's accessible for all.
Lovely, thank you. Martin?
Yeah, interesting. I was challenged by a number of organisations we worked with that kept coming out with the same, it's really difficult to make the L&D piece stick, and we've really tried to go out to market and get, a variety of different candidates, but it's not doable. So me and my team were on a mission last year to prove them wrong, and we did. So we went out to market, we worked with charities and job centres and people at the Social Mobility Commission to say, right, we're going to create a number of roles that require very little to no experience whatsoever, and we will give them the right training and support to do these jobs. We were flooded with applications. We've since hired 5 people in the last 6 months who are the most diverse team I've ever worked with, the brightest people, and all they needed was a chance. So by removing all the unnecessary rubbish out of the process that they needed to be experts in, and just saying, right, if you want a marketing job with us, tell us you've got a passion for marketing, and if you were to come in, what would you do? Keeping it open, making the process really simple. We've then tailored the learning by person to say, right, you know, if you're going to be in marketing, let's get you a mentor for somebody who does this really well in another business so you can learn from them and get you some support around that. If you're going to do administration, let's get you some shadowing or mentoring by somebody that does that. It's taking a very tailored approach based on the role, but just removing those barriers to entry. It just proves that you really can get really great, diverse, talented people in your organisation who will then stay because you've invested and nurtured and looked after them. And it's a lower cost model for the organisation than going out to recruit a really highly paid, experienced individual for the majority of roles. So it's a different way of thinking about it, I guess.
Well, that's really great. Really great to hear that, Martin. Really nice. So we're running out of time, and I really want to ask one more question to you all. So you really need to be really brief, because I've got a lot of questions to get through on the Q&A as well. I see you all laughing. It's not funny. Just really quickly. So we're here to talk about how companies can refocus their approach to attract the best talent in a difficult climate. So you've got one piece of advice to give everybody on this call to enable them to do just that. What would it be? Martin, you go first.
Start with a diagnostic and remove the barriers to entry.
Very good. Jackie?
Look outside of the box, speak the candidate's language, and don't be lazy with the process.
Salma?
I'll be biased, but I'd say incorporate flexibility within your talent attraction strategy and pull together a policy around this.
Fabulous. Annie, how about you?
Look at every part of the process, really question whether it's necessary, and if it's not necessary, take it out.
Brilliant. Oh, they were really good. I wasn't expecting you to do them all that short. So brilliant. That's all we've got time for in terms of our discussion. I hope it's given you some really good ideas. We've got kind of just shy of 15 minutes now to ask some of the questions that have come through, and we've had quite a few of those. Salma, I don't know whether this is a good thing or bad thing for you, but you're going first. So the first one is for you. It's anonymous, but it's for Salma. How do you tackle EVP in a global organisation, for example, a corporate centre located in one country with other satellite offices in other countries?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I guess what you think about is, obviously there'll be different cultures in different countries and different mindsets of employees and what they want out of your organization in different countries. So I think what you've got to look at really is, what is your strategy overall? What are you trying to achieve? What type of people are you trying to attract as a result? And then whether that's really driven by, a headquartered approach, or whether that's global, truly global. When we look at, for example, if you are considering flexible working as part of your employee value proposition, companies are taking a very mixed approach. Some are coming out very publicly, and again, it depends on sometimes what country you're operating in. So, for example, if you're operating in Japan, they may have a traditional approach, whereas if you're operating in the UK, it's a very different approach. But some companies are coming out very publicly saying, work where you like, we'll deal with it. That gives access to a global pool. Others are saying, we're going to take a cautious approach, assess the risk up front. And obviously people looking in will obviously get an idea of whether you're a truly global organization or whether you're really focused within the way your headquarters are pushing things out. We've seen some employers set up location agnostic talent development programs, which can be quite successful. And they're able to deploy their best talent to roles quickly across the business without the need to leave their home, for example. And that can, it's a way to show that you are really truly global. And obviously some will take a very targeted approach. Again, you've got to align it to your strategy. And when you're thinking about this, think about what your strategy is. What are the benchmarks that you have within your industry and what are others doing within your industry that can help you align and get the right talent, get that competitive edge, and then create some applicable rules and procedures around your processes. So have you got a significant number of employee requests in one country, for example? Do you really need to gear up for that country rather than have a truly global approach? So yeah, I think that would be my advice.
Thank you. Annie, one for you. Does EVP apply to all business sizes? And if so, is the approach different between SMEs and larger organisations? You're on mute, Annie. Standard.
That was bound to happen at some point. It had
Yeah.
to be me, didn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely applies to all business sizes. If you want to attract people, if you want to be attractive, then you need to think about your EVP. And I think the same rules apply in terms of really finding out about why do people love working there. It's no, if you're a small, an SME, and there's no point going to market saying, but there's massive career progression here, and we're all about these incredible benefits. When actually, do you know what? People love working there because they do a brilliant bacon butty next door and the social life's amazing. If that's what the reality is, talk about that, because that's why people stay. So same rules, and yes, definitely applies.
Fabulous. Question from Nick for Jackie and Martin. I will let Jackie go first because the name's written down first. So ready? I'm an advocate for counting people in during the recruitment process, but how would you suggest trying to turn that into the focus for the hiring managers who may be used to looking for reasons to not progress people? For example, someone trying to change career path and may not have 100% of the requirements, but can demonstrate a good proportion of what's needed.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Nick. Great question. To be honest, I don't want to steal Martin's thunder because Martin alluded to this, which I think would be really helpful for Nick. But that whole kind of focusing around potential, I think what we are so fixed, aren't we, on looking at skills, qualifications, experience, and throughout this session today, I think we've kind of had discussion around, are things really needed? But there's still got to be that shift in mindset, and that's the challenge, isn't it? So I'm always, given it's my focus, I would always say, look at learning and development options. So actually to get your management or hiring team in a different space, a different mindset space. And I would also think about encouraging slightly different interview questions, if you like. So perhaps asking yourself, or rather asking candidates, what would happen in the next, say, 12 months that would tell me your hire was a success, for example. And then you can get a sense of the potential and the creativity and potential innovation that candidate possesses and how they can articulate that. That's kind of my 2 pence. I'll also let Martin answer as well, but those are some of the things that I would say. Focus on some of that training to shift the mindset and get people thinking around the transferability of skills. And also, it's not always, it's often attitude that trumps skill set.
Lovely, thanks, Jackie. Martin, your turn.
Yeah, I'd echo what Jackie said, really. The potential aspect is key in terms of the process, to make sure you're assessing for that, not just asking traditional interview questions, because when you do that, it's never a good, not on its own, it's not a very good indicator of whether someone's going to perform well in the job anyway. I think the other thing is around hiring manager education. So exposing them to or holding the mirror up to how they currently recruit today and where some of the biases or some of the challenges are in that process, in how they conduct those interviews. Where we've done that type of work with other clients, we've seen a massive notable shift where their hiring managers are making far more informed decisions and not discounting somebody out of the progress for really small things that it's like, well, they just didn't quite engage with me, or they weren't quite as outspoken as the other person in the process. And it's like, well, hang on, is that what we're assessing here, or are we assessing their capability to do the job? So keeping yourselves honest around what you're looking for will stop some of that bias creeping in, I would say.
Fabulous. Okay, Martin, this is another one for you. I'm just doing them in the order that they're appearing on. So Do you have any advice to help senior leaders understand that kind of what we're talking about is directly linked to capital?
100%. So I've always prided myself on the fact that our work has got good commercial rigor to it. I don't believe in doing things just because they're nice things to do. I think, you know, mature organisations in this space are focused on growth and innovation. And actually, this is an imperative if they want to get that growth and innovation, because you need diversity of thought. You need new ways of thinking and doing things in organisations to really stand out against your competitors. And there's some fab resources and data research around this. So top of mind, McKinsey have done some great work in How Diversity Wins in their 2018 report. Inclusive Talent Management by Stephen Frost and Danny Coleman's got some really good insights in data around the commercials. From memory, I want to say it was about a 56% increase in EBITDA for organisations that have truly inclusive practices in their business. So this is not a small piece of the pie to go after. It's a huge growth opportunity for businesses to get it right.
Fabulous, thank you. Jackie, another one for you. One issue for young people with disabilities going into employment, maybe for the first time, is that they're often put off applying for a job because they're worried that the potential employer will not understand the need for reasonable adjustments for the candidate to do the role. How do organisations overcome this issue at the application stage?
Thank you for the question again, whoever that was. So here's the thing: start talking about it before you hire. That's all I'm going to say in relation to that. You know, I think this is often what happens is we go into hiring phase and we become very reactive or in the moment without that sort of strategy in place that's started to already embed. You know, Martin made that commercial point there about this work that is so important, and of course diverse teams and diverse organisations will only thrive, be successful, but more profitable when there's an equitable and inclusive culture within them. So, and that culture is embedded into the organisation. So to try and answer that question would be one to say, if your brand, going way back full circle to EVP, if your brand has become synonymous with one that doesn't just talk the talk at the time that they're recruiting, but actually they're really walking the walk in terms of this becomes part of their brand, it again starts to open up the doors for people who may previously have felt a bit concerned about approaching to do exactly that. So there's not always a one size fits all response to these kind of questions, but I would say certainly that's something that I would encourage all organisations to do, is really start thinking about, you know, going back to EVP, but their inclusive brand and how you showcase that to the world way before you're starting to acquire talent. You know, I've got links to organisations that also specifically support those people with certain disabilities, access the workplace and so on. So if anybody wants to make contact, I'm very happy to put people in touch if that's helpful.
Thank you so much. I think that is, look, we're 1 minute to 1, so we've done a fantastic job of timing there. Thank you to all of you. You have all been wonderful. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules today. Thank you to everyone who's joined. We really hope you've taken something away from the session. We will be in touch tomorrow with a link to the recording of the webinar, so you can forward it on, watch it again, and we'll also send an ebook out in a week's time around talent acquisition and some advice and guidance on that. So do keep an eye out on retalentsolutions.com for more events and insights, and I hope you all have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you, everybody.